much for joining me here today. Thank you to ECC for having me. I'm Cheeky Gorilla. You can call me Cheeky. I work on Protocol Guild, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to funding Ethereum's core protocol development. My talk today is called Maintaining Ethereum's Future. And if you're getting deja vu, that might be because you saw my presentation at ECC last year or at ETH Prague, where I had the same title. But this is, in fact, a brand new presentation, though I will be starting in kind of a similar way. So last year, I started with this, which is a roadmap for Ethereum's core protocol development that was shared by Vitalik Buterin at the end of 2023. And it was actually pretty cool because it compartmentalized the roadmap into these fun rhyming categories. And so you had the merge, the surge, the scourge, the verge, the plurge, and the splurge. And rhyming is obviously very, very fun, but I did argue that to most people, those words are actually gibberish, right? And so I spent the rest of the presentation trying to break down the roadmap into non-technical, layman-friendly terms. Now, funnily enough, since then, well, it seems that some people agreed with me that, in fact, we can do better than this roadmap. And so I'm very excited to share with you all the new and improved roadmap for Ethereum's core protocol development for 2026 and beyond. And here it is. So this new roadmap obviously adds a whole bunch more flowchart thingies. It ditches the fun rhyming categories and instead gives us the progression broken up into different layers, into different technical categories, while also anchoring chronologically on the planned upgrades in the future, including Glamsterdam, Hegota, IJK, L, and M forks. Pretty sweet, right? I know, it's still a little bit complicated, isn't it? But don't worry, that's exactly why I'm back. I'm gonna break this down for you in a non-technical, layman-friendly way. So let's talk about what you could expect from Ethereum's core protocol development in the short, medium, and long term. But let's quickly start by doing a recap of where we are today, because in fact, 2025 was a massive year for Ethereum's core protocol development. I would argue it was the most productive year ever. Case in point, 2 upgrades were shipped, starting with Pectra in the first half of the year. Pectra had something for everyone. For layer 2s, it doubled blob throughput. What are blobs? Blobs, in the most essential way you can think of as blocks, but specifically for layer 2s. And so by doubling that capacity, you're giving them space for more transactions and in theory cheaper. There were also awesome UX upgrades, basically giving Ethereum wallets an easier way to natively do cool things like batching transactions or paying for gas fees with tokens other than ETH, or even getting someone else to pay for the transaction for you. And for validators, there were also a bunch of cool things. We bumped the deposit from 32 ETH to 2024 ETH, 2048 ETH per validator, and also introduce a consolidation feature alongside that to basically reduce the number of validators in the network, reduce some of that overhead. And as part of that, we also had a compounding feature so that validators can now easily, essentially reinvest their staking income back into their validator. That was the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, core devs, they shipped Fusaka, which was pretty much just focused on something called PeerDAS, which essentially enabled mainnet nodes to only store a fraction of that blob data that we talked about, while still enabling that data to be fully reproducible across mainnet nodes. And so basically what it did was it enabled, or rather it reduced significantly the bandwidth requirements per individual blob, thus enabling huge blob increases in the future. So yeah, pretty productive year. The 3 goals of 2025 were scale Ethereum layer 1, scale layer 2s, and improve UX. And if you ask me, they exceeded all expectations. And of course, 2025 was also the year that Ethereum celebrated its 10th birthday, and alongside that, a very special milestone of 100% uptime. But that was last year. Let's talk about 2026. And core devs, they took the opportunity to rethink some of their priorities, which are now scale, improve UX, and harden the layer 1. The first 2, they're pretty self-explanatory, more or less holdovers from last year, but let's quickly double-click on what they mean by harden. It means that if we want to keep Ethereum's 100% uptime, then we do a couple things. We need to do things like making sure that all the testing infrastructure is in place to spot issues before they hit mainnet. It also means going post-quantum as soon as reasonably possible, and it means not having any censorship on the layer 1, because obviously that is not very credibly neutral. All right, let's talk about how this factors into the next upgrade, specifically that you can expect within the next 6 months. And that's something called Glamsterdam, which is by far the coolest upgrade name we've ever had. Now, we were hoping to ship this in the first half of the year. If you ask me, we're closer to August, September at this point, but who really knows? Either way, we can unpack what's going to be in this upgrade. It has 2 headliners, starting with something called Enshrined Proposer Builder Separation, or EPBS. Terrence earlier today did a deep dive on this, so if you want all the technical details, please look up his video from ECC. But to explain it very, very simply, every 12 seconds, another block is introduced into the Ethereum blockchain, and it's the job of validators to essentially propose these blocks. However, most validators nowadays, they don't actually construct or build these blocks themselves. Instead, they're using a third-party block builder who is essentially specialized in doing this kind of thing, meaning selecting and ordering transactions in such a way that they pay the most to the validator. And then that payment gets shared with the block builder. And so essentially, there's an economic incentive to use a third party, which is not ideal. We should, of course, always expect actors to act in their own economic self-interest. But on the other hand, Ethereum is also about disintermediating trust, and so this happening off-chain is not ideal. Enter EPBS, which enshrines all this activity into the blockchain, thus removing those trust assumptions and also the reliance on this off-protocol software. But we also get another huge benefit, which is basically given the chance to kind of redo the plumbing of Ethereum, we can reconfigure certain things, essentially reallocating time for certain actions. And that actually enables huge scalability improvements. The second headliner, it also sort of tinkers with the inner guts of Ethereum. It's called block-level access lists. Just a couple hours ago, that EIP champion, Tony, gave a detailed breakdown on that, so check that out if you want the technical details. But briefly, today, validators, they have to process every single new transactions in each block sequentially to verify the block. That's obviously slow. And what block level access list does, it removes that bottleneck by introducing parallelization. Now, parallelization is a very easy thing to say, but doing it, actually implementing this is actually very, very difficult. So this is a very impressive EIP, how they managed to solve this. So check that out if you're interested in more details. But basically, we're enabling nodes to do their job quicker. So beyond those 2 headliners, many other smaller improvements are also being considered. But I say being considered because the final decision on what's going to be included has not been made yet. Basically still waiting to make more progress on the headliners because they are the absolute priority. But discussions about which other smaller features to consider will kick off in the next few weeks. So I won't go into depth about all of them, but are the ones that I think are most likely to be included or at least be discussed intensively. So you can check that out. Let's move on to the medium term. What can you expect in the next year or so after Glamsterdam? And that's Hegota. Now, my best guess for when this will hit mainnet is the first half of next year, but again, anyone's guess is as good as mine. But obviously, if the Glamsterdam upgrade hasn't been fully scoped yet, then you're probably not surprised to hear that neither has Hegota. However, we do know that the headliner for Hegota will be something called Fork Choice Enforced Inclusion Lists. That name probably isn't very self-explanatory, though the last 2 words there do give you a hint, inclusion lists. And so what it actually does, it provides the protocol with a list of transactions that are valid that have to be included in the next block. And this is actually really cool because it improves Ethereum's censorship resistance, basically giving better inclusion guarantees to its users, while also strengthening Ethereum's position as the most credibly neutral blockchain. So this is a super cool thing. It also looks like Fossil might be the only headliner for Hegota, because this EIP alone already touches huge swaths of the protocol. But as before, of course, other smaller features are being considered depending on how big a lift Fossil will end up being. Again, I won't dive into all of these, but I will double click on one thing, the last one in that list, which is optional proofs. This is a really important step towards the snarkification of Ethereum, which essentially means that for validators, instead of recomputing every single transaction in the block to confirm it's valid, they can actually get a proof that confirms that the block is valid. And all the validators need to do is confirm that the proof is valid, which is very easy to do. And so this proof is known as a zero-knowledge proof, or a ZK proof, or a ZK snark, hence snarkification. And in a nutshell, snarkification allows us to leverage the magic of these ZK proofs to ultimately have enormous blocks, which are still very easy to validate by people who are running nodes at home or even on your smartwatch. So this is a really cool thing, and introducing these as optional proofs to start is obviously the first step towards making these proofs mandatory, but that's still a long time away. So that covers the medium term. So now we can jump forward and think about the long term. Now, the next few forks, they after Hegota, they don't actually have a name yet. We identify them as the first letter there, I, J, K, L, and M. And we can speculate what will be in those upgrades. Here's a list of things that are likely contenders, but let's be real, they're still in the research stage, and so they're guaranteed to change. And so for the purpose of this presentation, it doesn't make sense for us to dive into all of these. But what does make sense is to take a step back and look at what is the end game for Ethereum's core protocol development over the long term. And that is fast layer 1, gigagas layer 1, teragas layer 2, post-quantum layer 1, and private layer 1. What does all that actually mean? It means transactions being included and confirmed within seconds. It means 10,000 transactions per second on the layer 1. It means 10 million transactions per second on layer 2s. It means going post-quantum, and it means privacy as a first-class citizen. What's not mentioned on this slide is what comes after the end game, which is maintenance mode. Now, some people might consider maintenance mode to be ossification, but it basically means that Ethereum is done. It no longer needs to go through these massive upgrades. But Ethereum is built to last centuries, and so a degree of maintenance will, of course, always be required, hence maintenance mode. Now, all of this is, of course, very, very exciting. I'm sure you all agree. But maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, these core devs, they can't even align on a roadmap. So surely next year, Cheeky will be back at ECC 10, breaking down a different roadmap with a different endgame. But that's not actually the case. And as proof, here's a screenshot of my presentation from last year where I was talking about the long term of Ethereum's core protocol development. So we can actually compare side by side. And except for one thing, they basically say the same thing. I'll touch on what that one thing is in a little bit. But last year, snarkification was the word that I prominently used in the slide. This year, I just verbalized it. And snarkification, as I mentioned, of course, is the technology that will get us where we want to go with our end game. But snarkification is also one of these classic gibberish Ethereum words, which doesn't actually mean anything to normal people. And so it does make sense to anchor on more simple words, which is what's been done this year. So what's the difference between the two roadmaps? It's including privacy as a first-class citizen. Unfortunately, for the purpose of this presentation, me going down the privacy rabbit hole is out of scope. But if you look up the presentation by Mike McCabe from 0xBo, he did a presentation yesterday, which absolutely nails the privacy roadmap of Ethereum, so please check that out. The only thing that I will say is that I love this. I personally believe that privacy is a prerequisite for Ethereum to onboard the world. Yes, transparency has its place. Yes, it's great for certain applications, but it cannot be the default for your personal finances. But back to the roadmap. Apart from explicitly mentioning privacy there, again, the end game has not actually changed. And so even though I know at the start of this presentation, I kind of joked about the fact that we're moving from one complicated roadmap to another, they do not actually bring us down different paths. In fact, we know where we want to go. We've known it for a long time, but the implementation details of how to get there, those are the things that we're still ironing out. And quite frankly, I think that's absolutely reasonable when you consider that we're operating at the bleeding edge of technology. If you go to the ethereum.org website, they actually have a great quote highlighting the fluid nature of the roadmap. They say, think of Ethereum's roadmap as a set of intentions for improving Ethereum. It is the core researchers and developers' best hypothesis of Ethereum's most optimal path forward. And now that all of you are, of course, experts, layman experts, that is, on the roadmap, we can double click on one last thing. Number one, who are these core protocol researchers and developers? And number two, how important are they to executing the roadmap? Well, turns out that first question is super easy to answer because actually my job at Protocol Guild is to identify who are Ethereum's active core protocol contributors, and there they are, 187 individuals, people from all over the world, all of whom are directly involved in building and maintaining Ethereum's core protocol. If you're wondering, do they all work for the Ethereum Foundation? No, and neither do I. We've identified 11 different independent institutions from maybe 30 different projects or teams who are working on Ethereum's core protocol. And the EF, you can see them in the bottom middle there. They're one small part of that. And this is thanks to Ethereum's multi-client philosophy, which allows all sorts of different stakeholders to take part in building Ethereum's core protocol. So now, going back to the second question, how important are these core protocol contributors and core protocol researchers and developers to executing the roadmap? I would argue that they are the single most important factor for Ethereum to reach its endgame. Yes, there might be some regulatory uncertainty still. Yes, there's a looming threat of World War III or some kind of AI apocalypse, which would surely derail the roadmap. But barring those kind of things, the truth is that the ecosystem has an irrefutable dependency on Ethereum's core protocol contributors to get us where we want to go. And this brings me to why I've reused my title from last year for this presentation, because hopefully now you have a clear understanding of what the future of Ethereum is. But unfortunately, that future is at risk if we cannot retain and onboard Ethereum's core protocol contributors. And there are some red flags. Last year, we surveyed all of Ethereum's core protocol contributors, and we found some troubling stats. These core devs, they are in high demand. At least 40% of them that we know of receive job offers. And even worse, those job offers offer to more than double their pay. So said another way, Ethereum's core protocol contributors are passing up at least 50% of their market value to maintain and build the protocol that the entire ecosystem depends on. And yes, while it's true that Ethereum's core protocol contributors are often values motivated, that's not something we should be relying on, right? Because if there's one thing you should have taken from my presentation, it's that there's a lot of work left. Now, the good news is that we already have the necessary initiatives in place to hopefully fix this incentive alignment, but we do need still buy-in from the entire ecosystem. That initiative is the Protocol Guild Pledge, which is a commitment by projects building on Ethereum to donate 1% of their native token supply to Ethereum's core protocol contributors vested over 4 years. Why would you do this? Well, because to help retain the top-tier talent necessary to advance the protocol and steward it for decades to come. Because if you're building on Ethereum, you have a dependency on this work. And so you can think of taking the pledge as investing in the long-term health of the network that you depend on. And we have been thrilled by the success of this initiative to date. Shout out to all the projects who have taken the 1% pledge: EtherFi, PwnedDAO, Tyco, Puffer, EigenLayer, CurrencyCoin, ShutterDAO, sitting right there, Shape, ETH Storage, Aligned, IMEX, Yodel, and Ascend. Thanks to those generous donors and others, Protocol Guild has distributed $37 million worth of tokens to Ethereum's core protocol contributors since we got started in 2022. However, we do still need to increase our funding orders of magnitude to be competitive with the kind of job offers these talented individuals are receiving. But we're on the right path. 59% of Ethereum's core devs say that they consider funding from Protocol Guild as very or extremely important to their decision to continue working on Ethereum. So what we're doing is working. And we think the 1% pledge is the way to get there. So my ask to you, as I finish this presentation, if you know a project that is planning a token launch, please ask them to consider taking the Protocol Guild pledge to help fund the foundational public good that is Ethereum's core protocol development and secure the future of Ethereum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was perfectly timed, so we will not
Exactly
have any time for questions, but I believe people can ask you after the presentation.
I'll be outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you.